When a winter storm tore through Jackson, Wyoming, an elderly veteran couple lost everything: their home, their warmth, their hope. But when a retired Navy SEAL named Jack Carter and his loyal dog Rex found them in the snow, a new story began. What started as one man rebuilding a fallen cabin soon became something far greater, a miracle of kindness that brought an entire town together, because sometimes God doesn't move mountains. He sends someone to build a home beneath them. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if you believe that miracles still happen through ordinary hands, subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and the grace that warms even the coldest winter. The storm came like an explosion of glass and feathers, what the locals of Jackson, Wyoming, later called the snow bloom. The sky did not darken, it fractured into white fury. In minutes, roofs vanished beneath sheets of frozen light, and the forest groaned under the weight of sudden silence. Deep within the valley, a small cedar cabin stood, or tried to. Inside were Walter Brooks and his wife, Evelyn. Walter, 82, once a strong man of the mountains, had been a soldier before he became a carpenter. His back had bent slightly with time, but his jaw remained set like oak. The left side of his face bore an old scar from his Navy days, a thin white mark that never tanned, even under Wyoming sun. He was not a man of many words. Decades of building things with his hands had taught him silence could hold more weight than speech. That night, though, the silence frightened him. Evelyn, 79, was his opposite: small, warm, talkative. Her silver hair was tied in a bun, though loose strands framed her pale face. She had once been a nurse in Jackson's rural clinic and still moved with the careful grace of someone used to tending wounds. Her eyes, faded blue, had a habit of searching for the smallest traces of hope, even in the bleakest rooms. She was the kind of woman who could coax a rose to bloom from a crack in the rock, and that gentleness had kept Walter human after the wars. When the storm struck, Evelyn had been making tea. The first impact, the roof beam snapping like a gunshot, sent her sprawling. Walter pulled her close as the ceiling gave way, snow rushing in like a white tide. They crawled under the dining table, the last standing piece of furniture in the room. Wind screamed through the broken walls. The kettle rolled across the floor, clattering like shrapnel. Evelyn's hands trembled violently. "Walter, the roof," she whispered. "I know." His voice was steady, though his heart pounded like it hadn't since combat. He pressed his arm around her shoulders, feeling the bones light as twigs. "Stay down." Time stretched. The storm was relentless, dumping snow faster than any winter he could remember. The cabin's old timber, which had survived 60 winters, began to moan and twist. Walter's leg throbbed with pain, a wound that never quite healed from Korea, and the cold was starting to bite through his flannel shirt. Evelyn's breath came in shallow puffs, each one visible in the air. They had no strength to call for help. Even if they shouted, the wind would swallow their voices whole. For the first time in his life, Walter Brooks felt small. All the wars he'd fought, all the cabins he'd built, none of it mattered against nature's pure, merciless indifference. His thoughts drifted to the day he and Evelyn built this home. He remembered her laugh as they raised the first wall, how she had painted the door red, because she said it felt like sunlight in winter. Now that red door was somewhere under the snow, buried with their memories. Evelyn tried to keep talking. It was her way of pushing back fear. "You remember the summer we fixed the porch?" she murmured, her lips pale. You said it would last another 20 years. Walter nodded, forcing a smile. Guess I was wrong about that. She smiled weakly. You've only been wrong once before, the day you told me you'd never cry again. The words pierced him more deeply than the cold. He had made that promise the night his platoon was ambushed in 1952. He had buried too many friends to waste tears. But now, as the snow howled, he felt one slide down his cheek, hot against the freezing air. Outside, the mountain rumbled. A nearby tree cracked and fell, shaking what remained of the cabin. Evelyn flinched. Walter wrapped both arms around her. Hold on, Evie, just hold on. He didn't know how long they stayed that way, minutes, maybe hours. The world had narrowed to a dim corner of splintered wood and muffled heartbeats. Evelyn's head rested against his shoulder, her breathing shallow but steady. When the storm finally eased, it left a silence so deep it hurt the ears. Morning came gray and heavy. The cabin looked like a shipwreck under ice. From the outside, only the chimney and part of the roof showed. Inside, Walter stirred. His arms were stiff, his joints refusing to move. Evelyn, he whispered. Her eyes fluttered open. She smiled faintly, though her lips were blue. We made it, she said. Barely. He tried to stand, but pain lanced through his hip. He gritted his teeth, unwilling to let her see. That's when a faint sound reached them, distant but human. A voice shouting through the still air, followed by the crunch of boots on snow. It was Tom Miller, their neighbor from the lower ridge. Tom was in his late 40s, tall and broad-shouldered, with a face half hidden by a rough brown beard. Years working in the lumber trade had given him hands like bark and a gait that always leaned into the wind. Beneath his gruff exterior was a man shaped by loss. His brother had died in a snowstorm 15 years ago, and Tom had never stopped blaming himself. Since then, he'd become the sort of neighbor who checked on everyone when the weather turned cruel. He had been out before dawn, worried that the Brooks hadn't shown any chimney smoke. When he saw the flattened cabin, his stomach dropped. "Walter! Evelyn!" he shouted. The faintest answer, a weak groan, guided him to the corner where they lay. Tom tore away planks with his gloved hands, the wood cutting his skin. Beneath, he found them curled together, faces pale, surrounded by snow and shattered glass. For a moment, he thought they were gone. Then Evelyn blinked. "Thank God," he breathed. "Hold on, I've got you." He radioed his wife, Sarah Miller, who was waiting at their farmhouse. Sarah was 45, tall and lean, with reddish-brown hair tied under a wool cap. Her skin had the freckled softness of someone used to mountain sun. Practical and calm, she was the kind of woman who could carry both a wounded dog and a crying child without dropping either. Her kitchen was always warm, smelling of cedar smoke and stew, the unofficial refuge of their small valley. When Tom carried the Brookses into their house, Sarah already had blankets warming by the stove. She pressed her hand to Evelyn's forehead, then met Walter's eyes. "You're safe now," she said simply. Walter looked around. The crackle of the fire, the scent of pine soap, Sarah's gentle voice, and something in him broke loose. He wanted to thank them, but words stuck in his throat. Evelyn squeezed his hand, whispering, "Home, Walter. For now, this is home." Outside, the snow still glowed faintly under the rising sun, a valley of white silence and second chances. Inside the Miller house, warmth began to creep back into the lives of two people who thought their story had ended. The sun rose over Jackson Valley with a weak light that seemed afraid to touch the snow. It was the kind of winter morning where sound barely traveled, where even the crows refused to call. After the night of the snow bloom, the world looked freshly erased. The Miller farmhouse stood like an island in the white sea. Inside, the smell of oatmeal and pine smoke fought back the cold that crept through every crack. Jack Carter stood by the frozen fence line with his German shepherd, Rex, his breath visible in short, controlled bursts. Jack was 50, tall and broad-shouldered, with a square jaw covered by 2 days of salt and pepper stubble. His eyes were gray-blue, calm, scanning, the kind that had once measured danger by the twitch of a shadow. He wore an old Navy SEAL parka, its patches faded, its edges scarred by sand and salt water. He had come to Jackson 2 winters ago, buying a small ranger cabin near the edge of the forest. People said he came for peace, but those who had seen his limp or the deep line between his brows suspected he came to bury ghosts. Rex, a 7-year-old black and tan shepherd, had been his partner in the service. The dog carried himself like a soldier, alert ears, sharp gaze, silent obedience, but his eyes softened whenever he looked at his master. Jack had spent the morning checking the forest line for fallen trees when Rex stopped suddenly, nose to the wind. The dog gave a low whine and trotted toward the ridge where the Brooks' old cabin had stood. Jack followed, snow crunching beneath his boots. What he found was not a cabin, but a memory shredded by weather. Splintered beams, frozen glass, a few broken dishes still visible under a skin of ice. The air smelled faintly of smoke and pine resin. Rex pawed at the snow, sniffing intently near a half-buried trunk. Something metallic gleamed faintly. Jack crouched and brushed it free. A bronze medallion on a torn blue ribbon. A Korean War Service medal. He turned it over, reading the faint engraving. Walter H. Brooks, 7th Infantry Division. Jack's jaw tightened. He'd met Walter once, briefly, when buying lumber at the town store. The old man had a firm handshake and eyes that still looked for orders even in peacetime. Jack had liked him immediately, one of the few men in town who understood the silence soldiers carried home. He pocketed the medal carefully and scanned the wreckage. Part of the foundation still stood, a few concrete blocks and the charred outline of a chimney. His mind began to work without permission. Angles, stress points, the weight of snow loads, the logistics of rebuilding. The instinct was automatic, the same way he once planned rescue missions. He pulled a notepad from his coat and began sketching. From the ridge, the wind carried a faint sound. Someone approaching. It was Mike Parker, a local carpenter in his 30s, trudging uphill with a coil of rope over his shoulder. Mike had an easy smile even in bad weather, his thick beard coated with frost. His eyes were the pale green of thawing ice. He'd grown up in Jackson, the son of a logger, known for helping neighbors without being asked. But he carried a subtle stiffness in his right arm, a scar from a sawmill accident years ago that ended his dream of becoming a firefighter. "Didn't expect anyone else up here," Mike said, catching his breath. "Checking the damage," Jack replied. "You from town?" Mike nodded. "Name's Parker. Tom Miller sent me up. Said this was where the Brooks place went down." Jack's gaze returned to the ruins. "Yeah, they made it out." "That's something." Mike studied the wreckage beside him. "Looks like it'll have to be cleared. You thinking what I'm thinking?" Jack gave a half smile. "Probably. A rebuild." Mike chuckled. "In this weather? You seals are all the same. See a mountain and start climbing before checking the oxygen. Old habits die hard. The two men walked the perimeter, examining what could be salvaged. Most of the beams were too warped to reuse, but the stone from the chimney could be cleaned. Rex moved methodically, sniffing through debris, occasionally barking when he uncovered something intact. A metal lunchbox, a family photo sealed in a frame, a cracked teacup. Jack gathered them in a box, labeling each piece. By noon, the wind had sharpened to icy knives. They took shelter behind the fallen chimney, eating from ration packs. Mike poured coffee from a thermos. "So, what's your plan, Carter?" Jack hesitated, looking at the ruins. "I want to rebuild it. For them. The right way, insulated, accessible, storm-proof. They deserve to come home." Mike raised an eyebrow. "You planning to do that alone?" "I've worked alone before." Mike smiled faintly. "Yeah, but this isn't a mission. It's winter in Wyoming. You'll need help." "I'll take you then." That made Mike laugh, a deep, honest laugh that fogged the air. "Guess I walked right into that." He extended his gloved hand. "All right, Seal. You got yourself a carpenter." They shook on it. Rex barked once as if approving the alliance. When they hiked back toward town, the afternoon light was already fading. At the Miller farmhouse, Tom was repairing a snow fence when they arrived. He wiped his hands on his coat, frowning as he saw the box Jack carried. "What's that?" "Things from the Brooks place," Jack said. "And this." He handed Tom the medal. Tom's rough features softened. "Walter's? He'll want to see that." "Where are they now?" "Inside. Sarah's been keeping them warm." Jack followed him in. The living room glowed with lamplight. Evelyn sat wrapped in quilts near the stove, her frail hands curled around a mug of tea. Walter, pale but stubbornly upright, stared out the window as if measuring the distance back to his land. When he saw the medal, his eyes brightened. "You found it," he whispered. "Thought it was gone forever." Jack nodded. "The cabin's a mess, but not hopeless." Evelyn looked up, her voice soft. "Hopeless is a word we stopped using a long time ago." Jack hesitated, then laid his notepad on the table. The rough sketch of a cabin took shape under the lamplight. Stronger walls, wider doors, reinforced roof beams. "If you'll let me," he said quietly, "I'd like to rebuild it, the way it should have been from the start." Walter studied the drawing. The lines were clean, practical, efficient. "That's a soldier's cabin," he murmured. "A safe one," Jack replied. "For you both." Silence stretched. Evelyn's hand found Walter's, squeezing gently. "What do you think?" Walter looked at Jack, the steady eyes, the quiet conviction, and then at Rex, who sat watching him, tail still, but eyes bright. Something in the old man softened. "If you're serious, we'll help however we can, but it won't be easy." Jack gave a faint smile. "Nothing worth doing ever is." Outside, the snow began to fall again, slower this time, as if the mountain itself was listening. Jack turned toward the window, watching flakes drift against the glass. He didn't say it aloud, but he felt it, the same restlessness that had followed him since the Navy. Only this time, it wasn't about combat or orders. It was about redemption. Rex lifted his head suddenly, ears twitching toward the woods. A sound, a distant crack, echoed from the ridge like timber under strain. Jack's eyes narrowed. The storm wasn't over. Something up there was moving again. He looked back at Walter. "You still have tools from the old place?" Walter nodded slowly. "Buried under the shed, if it's still standing." Jack reached for his coat. "Then tomorrow," he said, "we start digging." Outside, the snow thickened once more, swallowing the valley in white. And somewhere beyond the ridge, the mountain groaned, a warning, or perhaps an invitation. Morning arrived with a pale light that failed to warm anything. The storm had slowed but not stopped, leaving the air heavy with ice dust that glimmered like powdered glass. Jack Carter was already awake, his breath forming clouds in the cabin he called home, a small one-room ranger shelter built from pine and solitude. Rex, his loyal German shepherd, lay near the stove, muzzle on his paws, eyes half open, watching every move his master made. Jack poured hot coffee into a dented tin mug and stared at the blueprint rolled out on the table. It was a new beginning, sketched on old paper. By noon, Jack and Mike Parker loaded their tools into Tom Miller's snow truck. Tom, always practical, had spent years modifying the vehicle: reinforced treads, extra floodlights, a front winch that could pull a small tree. He looked like part of the machine himself, beard flecked with ice, eyes narrowed from too many winters spent rescuing stranded hikers. "Weather's turning again," he muttered. "Road'll freeze by dusk." Jack glanced at the sky. "Then we build before it does." The three men rumbled toward the Brooks property, the truck's engine echoing through the frozen valley. The world looked erased. No lines, no color, only white and the dark ribs of the forest. When they reached the site, Rex jumped out first, nose to the wind, ears twitching. He barked once, a sound sharp and sure, then trotted toward the half-buried foundation. They began by clearing the snow and cutting away broken beams. The air was so cold that sawdust froze before it hit the ground. Mike hummed while he worked, old country tunes no one remembered the lyrics to. Jack said little, his movements precise, efficient. He was building not just a house, but a purpose. By late afternoon, their fingers were numb, but they had managed to uncover the old stone hearth and lay the first new support beams. Tom built a fire inside a metal drum, and for the first time since the snow bloom, warmth returned to the ruins. Evelyn and Walter arrived later, bundled in thick coats Sarah had sewn years ago. Evelyn's face was pale but glowing with quiet pride. "I can't believe it," she whispered. "It's really happening." Walter leaned on a cane Tom had carved for him. His breath steamed in the cold. "Never thought I'd see this again," he said softly. "Feels like watching time rebuild itself." They weren't alone for long. As word spread, more townsfolk came. Frank Dugan, the hardware store owner, showed up with nails and rope. Frank was short and round, with a permanent squint and a voice that sounded like gravel in a coffee can. He'd lost his wife in a car accident 10 years ago and had since become the kind of man who fixed everything. Broken windows, broken fences, sometimes broken people. "Heard you boys were putting up a frame," he said gruffly. "Can't let you use those cheap bolts you like, Parker." "Cheap?" Mike laughed. "You sell them. To me. That's why I know they're cheap." Frank grinned and started unloading supplies. Not long after, Lucy Bennett, a local teacher in her late 20s, arrived with a group of her high school students. Lucy was tall and slender, with wind-burned cheeks and dark eyes that seemed too kind for her age. She wore an oversized parka and wool gloves with mismatched fingers. "The kids wanted to help," she said shyly. "They're tired of online classes. Figured this was better education." Jack nodded. "Then welcome to shop class." The laughter that followed melted something inside the old veteran. He found himself teaching. showing the teens how to brace a beam, how to align the corners with string, how to read one direction before driving a nail. Even Rex joined the lesson, fetching dropped hammers with military precision. By evening, the skeleton of a new cabin rose from the snow. It wasn't much yet, but its shape stood proud against the fading light. Evelyn cried softly when she saw the outline of the roof. Walter stood beside her, hand on her shoulder. "You gave us back our place in the world," she told Jack. Jack looked away, uncomfortable with praise. Just building what's right. But as night fell, the weather turned. The wind picked up again, shrieking across the valley. Snow began to fall thick and heavy, covering tools and footprints. "Time to pack it up," Tom warned. "We'll lose visibility soon." They secured the equipment, covered the beams with tarps, and started the truck. The headlights cut through the storm like spears of gold. Rex whined softly, staring toward the woods. "What is it, boy?" Jack asked. The dog barked once, ears rigid. Through the blur of snow, a faint orange glow flickered in the distance, too bright to be lantern light, too wild to be the sunset. Smoke began curling upward. Mike frowned. "That's north of here. Old logging road." Tom's jaw tightened. No one should be up there. Not this weather. Jack's instincts came alive, the kind honed from years in combat zones where seconds decided lives. "Stay here," he ordered. But Rex was already bounding ahead, disappearing into the storm. Jack cursed under his breath and followed, flashlight slicing through the white chaos. His boots crunched over ice, breath burning in his chest. The glow grew stronger, fire against snow. When he reached the clearing, he stopped. An old shed had caught fire, its roof half collapsed under heat and snow. Through the smoke, he could make out movement. Someone inside, coughing, trapped behind debris. "Rex, heel!" Jack shouted. But the dog lunged forward, barking furiously, circling the flames. Jack grabbed a broken board, beat back the smaller fires, and ducked through the smoke. Inside he saw a figure, a young man, maybe 20, with soot covering his face and terror in his eyes. He was clutching something metallic. Jack hauled him out into the snow, rolling him over to clear his airway. "You okay?" The boy coughed violently, nodding. Jack shone his flashlight on the object still clutched in the kid's gloved hand. It wasn't a tool or a weapon. It was a rusted military dog tag. Jack froze. The name etched on it was one he knew, his own. For a long moment the wind swallowed everything, the fire, the boy's gasps, even Rex's barking. Jack stared at the tag, heart pounding. "Where did you get this?" he demanded. The boy looked terrified. It was buried in the snow by the old foundation." Jack's breath caught. The foundation, Walter's cabin site. Rex whimpered softly beside him, eyes reflecting the firelight. Jack closed his fist around the tag, his expressions hardening. Whatever was buried beneath that ground wasn't just stone and memories. It was something that had been waiting for him all along. The boy's name was Caleb Wren, and he couldn't have been more than 21. When Jack brought him back through the storm, the others were already waiting in the Miller farmhouse. Snow dripped from Jack's coat as he lowered Caleb into a chair near the fire. The young man's face was streaked with soot, his hair black and damp, his eyes a startling green that flickered between fear and confusion. He wore an old army field jacket, 2 sizes too big, its collar torn, and his hands shook from the cold. Sarah Miller, ever the quiet guardian of the valley, brought a blanket and pressed a cup of hot cider into his palms. Her touch was calm and firm, the kind that stilled trembling hearts. Jack crouched beside him. "You're lucky we found you. That shed was ready to collapse. What were you doing out there?" Caleb swallowed hard, voice thin as thread. "Looking for something. I thought I saw light from the ridge. When I went closer, the ground gave way. There was metal buried in the snow. I dug it up. It had your name on it." Tom Miller, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, frowned. "You saying you just found his dog tag lying out there? That's one hell of a coincidence." Jack turned the tag over in his palm again. The letters were old, weathered. The serial number was the same as his, but the metal had a dull reddish hue, rust that shouldn't exist. He'd lost his tags years ago in Afghanistan during a rescue mission gone wrong. No one had ever found them until now. Caleb's gaze darted toward the window where Rex stood, watching the snow. "I didn't mean to start the fire," he said. "There was something else buried there, something I thought was wood. But when I pried it up, it sparked." Mike Parker entered, shaking snow off his jacket. "We went back this morning. The shed's gone, burned clean. But we found scorched tracks near the ridge, truck tires, not local." Tom's brow furrowed. "Who the hell's driving around that slope in a blizzard?" Jack's voice dropped low. "Someone who doesn't want to be seen." The tension settled thick as frost. Walter Brooks, who had been listening quietly by the stove, lifted his head. His old eyes, still sharp, still soldier's eyes, met Jack's. "You think this is about you?" "I don't know," Jack admitted. "But that tag didn't bury itself." For a moment, the only sound was the pop of the fire and the faint whine of wind against the shutters. Sarah broke the silence. "If someone's out there in this weather, they're desperate or dangerous. Either way, no one goes out alone tonight." Evelyn nodded from her seat, clutching her blanket tighter. "Storms don't always start in the sky," she murmured. Jack stood, jaw set. "I'll check the ridge again at dawn. There's more under that snow, something I need to see." The next morning came gray and still, as if the valley itself was holding its breath. Jack and Rex left before sunrise, following the frozen trail Caleb had described. The world was silent except for the crunch of snow beneath their boots and the steady breathing of the dog beside him. Halfway up the ridge, they found the remains of the shed, blackened wood, twisted nails, and melted glass. Jack knelt beside the ashes and started clearing the snow. After several minutes, his glove struck something solid, metal. He brushed away the frost. Beneath was a half-buried steel case, scorched and locked tight. Military issue, cold to the touch. Rex growled softly, tail low, hackles raised. Jack studied the insignia etched faintly on the lid. It wasn't American. It was older, familiar in a way that chilled him. A stylized eagle over 2 letters, WS. He knew that mark. It belonged to a covert weapons project, Winter Sentinel, a black operation he had been part of years ago. Officially, it had been shut down after an explosion at a remote Arctic base, but Jack had always suspected otherwise. The explosion had killed his entire unit, or so he was told. He'd walked away believing the project was buried under classified snow. Now it was here, in Wyoming. A distant sound snapped him from thought, the rumble of an engine. Jack and Rex ducked behind a drift just as a dark pickup rolled slowly along the tree line. The driver wore a parka with no plates, windows tinted. It stopped for a moment, the passenger scanning the ridge through binoculars, then drove off toward the old logging road. Jack exhaled slowly. They're watching the sight. He hauled the case out of the snow and strapped it to his pack. "Come on, boy." By the time he returned to town, dusk was falling again. Inside the Miller barn, Tom and Mike were loading lumber for the next day's build. Caleb was helping, quieter now, as if carrying a weight he couldn't name. When Jack entered, everyone turned to the metal case in his hands. "What's that?" Mike asked. Jack set it down on a table. "Something we shouldn't have found." Tom examined it, whistling softly. "Military lockbox. You going to open it?" "Not here," Jack said. His tone left no room for argument. Too many eyes. Caleb looked pale. "Is it dangerous?" Jack glanced at him. "If it's what I think it is, yes." Evelyn appeared at the barn door, wrapped in her old shawl. "You can't keep living like the war never ended, Jack," she said gently. "Whatever ghosts you brought back, you need to lay them down." He wanted to tell her that ghosts didn't stay buried just because you wanted peace, that sometimes they dug themselves out when the snow was thin enough. Instead, he said, "I'm just trying to keep everyone safe." That night, while the town slept, Jack sat alone by the fire with the steel box at his feet. He cleaned the rust from the latch, the dog tag still hanging from his neck. Rex lay beside him, ears flicking at every distant creak of ice. When he finally forced the lock open, a hiss of cold air escaped. Inside, beneath layers of frost, were sealed documents, a black data drive, and a single photograph, blurry, burned around the edges. It showed a younger Jack standing beside 5 other men in Arctic gear. One of them was Caleb Wren's father, Captain Daniel Wren, his commanding officer. Jack's pulse quickened. Written across the back in faded ink were the words, "If you're reading this, they never stopped." He turned toward the window. Far up the ridge, through the curtains of fallen snow, a flicker of headlights moved again, watching, waiting. And this time, Jack knew the war had followed him home. The morning after the discovery felt heavier than the storm itself. A strange hush hung over Jackson Valley, as though the mountain was listening. Jack Carter sat at the kitchen table of the Miller farmhouse, the steel box open in front of him, the frost still clinging to its hinges. The photograph of his old unit lay beside his coffee mug, the burned edges curling inward. Across from him, Caleb Wren stared at the picture too, his hands clasped so tightly the knuckles had gone white. "I remember that face," Caleb murmured, pointing at the man standing beside Jack. "That's my dad, younger than I've ever seen him." His voice cracked slightly, caught between awe and grief. Jack nodded slowly. "Captain Daniel Wren. Your father was the best man I ever served under, smart, stubborn, too brave for his own good. We were stationed together on the Winter Sentinel project, northern operations off-grid." Caleb looked up. "What was it, a weapons test?" Jack's eyes hardened. "That's what they told us, until people started disappearing." Tom Miller entered, carrying firewood. "You two been at this all night?" He set the logs by the stove, eyeing the steel box. "That thing gives me a bad feeling, Jack." "It should," Jack replied quietly. "Whatever we dug up wasn't meant to see daylight." Sarah Miller appeared next, her auburn hair pinned back, still wearing her wool robe. Despite her calm presence, there was concern in her eyes. "You've been pacing since dawn. The whole town's whispering. They saw the trucks again, parked by the old mine road." Mike Parker arrived soon after, stomping the snow from his boots. His expression was grim. "Heard the same thing. Black pickups, no plates, moving at night. I followed one until it turned up the ridge near the brook site." He turned to Jack. That's your war following you, isn't it?" Jack didn't answer. He took a breath, steady, but shallow. "If it is, then it's my mess to clean up." Sarah crossed her arms. "Don't you dare go alone." But Jack was already pulling on his jacket. "Rex and I will go up first. I just need to see if the ridge is still secure." Evelyn Brooks appeared from the hallway, leaning on her cane. "You think security comes from a gun," she said softly, "but sometimes it comes from letting others stand beside you." Her words followed him out the door like a benediction and a warning. The sky was pale and cold, and the snow underfoot whispered as Jack and Rex made their way toward the ridge. The dog moved ahead, nose low, ears pricked. The trail they'd cleared yesterday had already vanished beneath new powder. Halfway up, Rex stopped suddenly, tail stiff, teeth bared. Jack raised his rifle and crouched low. There, half hidden by the drift, were fresh footprints. Not boots from their town. Military tread. He followed them to the tree line, where he found a makeshift camp. 2 sleeping bags, burned-out fire, and a single silver thermos marked with a red insignia, WS, the same mark from the box. Someone else had been searching the same ground. A rustle behind him made him turn sharply. A woman stepped out from between the pines, hands raised. She was in her late 30s, tall, wearing a heavy tactical coat and black gloves. Her face was sharp-featured, high cheekbones, pale skin wind-burned from the cold, and dark eyes that looked older than her years. She had a streak of silver in her hair that didn't belong to her age. "Jack Carter," she said evenly. "Still working for ghosts?" He raised the rifle. "Depends who's asking." She smiled faintly. "You can call me Agent Mara Keene, Department of Defense Liaison, or what's left of it." Rex growled low. Jack didn't lower his weapon. "You got a strange way of saying hello, showing up in a snowfield with no backup." "I had backup," she said, glancing toward the destroyed camp. "Until your friends scared them off last night." Jack's jaw tightened. They weren't my friends. Mara stepped closer, unflinching, even with the rifle aimed her way. "We've been tracking remnants of the Winter Sentinel project for years. Most of it died after your last mission, but someone's rebuilding it, off the grid, under civilian fronts. The files in that box weren't supposed to exist. You weren't supposed to exist." Jack's grip on the rifle tightened. "Try speaking English." She exhaled, her breath fogging. "Your unit was targeted for silence. Daniel Wren wasn't killed in that explosion. He was extracted. The project wanted something he carried. Data on a prototype energy core. You were the insurance policy, the failsafe." Jack blinked. "You're saying I was bait?" "Bait," Mara said softly. "And backup plan. They hid your records, your tags, everything that tied you to Winter Sentinel. Then they buried the site and walked away. Until someone dug it up." Jack's mind reeled. The photo, the box, the boy. Caleb's father, if he is alive, where is he? Mara hesitated, then shook her head. "I don't know, but someone out here does. The man driving those trucks, he's not government. He's private recovery ex-operators off the books, and they've been here longer than you think." Rex barked suddenly, loud and urgent. Jack turned and saw a red laser dot flicker across Mara's chest. "Down!" he shouted, tackling her into the snow as the first shot cracked through the trees. Bark splintered above them. Rex darted behind a stump, barking furiously. Jack rolled, fired back once, saw a dark shape retreat toward the ridge. Silence followed, thick and sharp. Mara gasped, clutching her shoulder. The bullet had grazed her jacket, tearing the fabric but missing flesh. "They found us faster than I thought." Jack helped her up. "Welcome to Jackson." They hurried back down the slope, moving through the frozen brush until the farmhouse roofs appeared below. As they reached the edge of town, Jack saw headlights flicker near the Brooks property. Black trucks again, engines idling, the same ones from the night before. Mara followed his gaze. "They're closing in." Jack clenched his jaw. "Then they'll find more than they bargained for." She frowned. "You can't fight them alone." "I'm not alone," he said. Rex growled low, eyes glowing in the dark like embers. As they reached the farmhouse, the wind picked up, carrying a low hum across the valley. Jack stopped, listening. The sound wasn't wind, it was mechanical. From somewhere in the ridge, a faint blue light pulsed beneath the snow, rhythmic like a heartbeat. Mara saw it too. Her expression turned pale. "Oh my God," she whispered. "They activated it." The ground trembled faintly under their feet, and the hum deepened, steady, rising. Jack looked toward the ridge, the same place they had buried the box. Snow began to crack along the slope, revealing a faint metallic gleam beneath. Whatever winter sentinel had been, it wasn't done sleeping. The hum beneath the mountain grew into a steady vibration that seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of the earth itself. Jack Carter stood at the edge of the ridge, snow swirling around his boots, the faint blue light pulsing beneath the frozen crust like something alive. Behind him, Agent Mara Keene was setting up a small transmitter, her gloved hands moving fast despite the wind. Rex prowled the perimeter, barking sharply at every echo. The air smelled of ozone and old metal. Below, Jackson Valley lay in uneasy silence. At the Miller farmhouse, Tom and Mike were preparing the townsfolk to evacuate, loading trucks, securing supplies, and checking fuel. The sky had darkened again, though the storm had not yet returned. It was the stillness before something worse. Caleb Wren refused to stay behind. He climbed the ridge against the wind, face raw with cold, but eyes blazing with determination. His father's old jacket hung loose on him, the sleeves too long, but he wore it with pride. "You're not leaving me down there," he said when he reached Jack. Jack turned, his expression grim. "This isn't your fight." "It became mine the moment you showed me that photo," Caleb shot back. "If my father's out there, if this thing is part of what he died for, I need to see it." Mara gave a short nod. "He's right. Whatever's buried here, it's not just technology, it's legacy." The words hung between them like cold steel. Jack crouched and brushed snow from the exposed metal. Beneath it, faint patterns began to emerge, circular etchings like circuitry fused with bone. "Winter Sentinel," he whispered. "They didn't bury a weapon, they buried a reactor." Mara looked at the readings from her scanner. "It's still active, low output but growing. Something reconnected the power feed recently. Those trucks must have deployed an anchor signal." Jack's voice was flat. "Then they're trying to wake it up." A crack of gunfire echoed from below. Snow exploded near their feet. "Incoming!" Mara shouted, ducking. Jack dragged her behind a drift, returning fire with sharp precision. Rex bolted downhill, weaving between rocks, his barking fierce and relentless. Through the scope, Jack saw 3 figures advancing, armed men in dark snowsuits, faces hidden behind mirrored visors. Private recovery operatives, the same ones who had shot at them before. Jack fired again, taking down the lead man. Mara switched positions, covering his flank. Caleb, trembling but steady, grabbed one of the fallen rifles. His breath came fast, but his aim was true. "They're trying to flank us," he yelled. "Then don't let them," Jack ordered. The fight was short and brutal. When the smoke cleared, 2 bodies lay still in the snow. The third had fled down the slope. Jack's shoulder was bleeding from a graze, but he ignored it. Rex limped back, muzzle frosted, tail wagging faintly. Mara looked at the ridge, where the blue light was now pulsing faster. "It's unstable," she said. "If it breaches containment, it'll take the whole valley with it." Jack's voice was low, almost calm. "Can you shut it down?" "Maybe," she replied, "but it'll need a manual override inside the core chamber, and someone's got to stay long enough to trigger the failsafe." Jack already knew what that meant. "Tell me where." Mara looked up sharply. "No, you've done enough dying for one lifetime." Caleb stepped forward. "Then I'll do it." Jack grabbed his arm. "You're not dying for ghosts, kid. Your father wouldn't want that." Tears froze on Caleb's lashes. "Then who will? Because someone has to." For a moment, the 3 of them stood in the falling snow, the hum beneath their feet now loud enough to feel in their bones. Then Jack exhaled slowly and pressed something into Caleb's hand. The dog tag. "You'll carry this instead," he said, "and when this is over, you bury it somewhere warm." He turned to Mara. "Get them off the ridge." "Jack, go!" he barked. Mara hesitated, then nodded, grabbing Caleb by the arm and pulling him downhill. Rex refused to leave, planting his paws in the snow beside Jack. The dog's eyes locked onto his master's. Jack smiled faintly. "You always were the stubborn one." He reached the access hatch, half buried in the snow, and forced it open. The stairs beneath glowed faintly blue. The air was cold, humming with static. As he descended, the memories came. Arctic nights, orders whispered through radios, Captain Wren's voice echoing over the wind. "We built something that can't be unbuilt, Jack. If it ever wakes, you'll know what to do." Now he did. The chamber was a cathedral of ice and light. In its center stood a sphere of glass and metal, cracked but alive, pulses of azure lightning dancing across its surface. Jack removed his gloves, fingers trembling. The control console was still operational, rusted but functional. He keyed in the manual sequence he had memorized decades ago. Above, explosions echoed. Mara and Caleb fighting to hold the line. The hum intensified, becoming a roar. A warning light flashed red. Jack pressed the final key, locking the override. "End it," he whispered. The sphere brightened, then shattered in silence. A wave of light expanded outward, washing through the tunnels, the snow, the ridge, pure, blinding, cold. When Caleb opened his eyes, he was lying in the snow at the base of the mountain. The air was still. Mara knelt beside him, her face pale, breath visible in quick bursts. "It's over," she said softly. "The core collapsed, contained itself." He looked up. The ridge was gone, just a smooth slope of ice where the reactor once slept. No smoke, no fire, only stillness. A faint shape appeared through the mist. Rex. Limping, fur singed, eyes clouded, but alive. He reached them, dropped a torn scrap of parka at Caleb's feet, Jack's. Around the fabric hung the second dog tag, glinting in the weak sunlight. Caleb clutched it, tears freezing on his cheeks. He stayed. Mara looked at the horizon. He finished what they started. As dawn broke, the storm clouds finally parted, revealing the first light of spring filtering through. In the valley below, the people of Jackson began to emerge from their homes, seeing smoke-free skies for the first time in days. Tom and Sarah stood outside the farmhouse, holding each other in silence as the sun rose over the white fields. Weeks later, the new Brooks cabin was finished. It stood strong, warmed by a wood stove and laughter. Evelyn planted a young oak by the porch, saying it would grow for all those who stood in the cold so others could come home. Caleb stayed in Jackson to help rebuild. Some nights he walked up the ridge with Rex at his side. When the wind blew just right, he swore he could hear a voice carried on the snow, steady, calm, commanding, and when he looked up, the northern sky shimmered faintly blue like a heartbeat beneath the clouds, the last light of winter sentinel. Sometimes God does not send miracles as thunder or light, but as quiet hearts that keep building when everything seems lost. Jack Carter never asked to be a hero, yet through his hands, his loyalty, and his final act of love, heaven reminded us that no winter lasts forever. Even in the coldest season, there is a warmth that refuses to die, the warmth of faith, sacrifice, and compassion. When the storm ended over Jackson Valley, people did not see fire or glory. They saw peace, the kind only God can leave behind. The oak tree by the Brooks cabin still stands today, growing through frost and sunlight alike, whispering that every act of kindness is a prayer, and every life saved is a miracle made by human hands guided by divine grace. And maybe that's what God wanted us to remember, that sometimes He works through people like Jack, through courage born from pain and mercy found in the ordinary. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to thank God for the unseen miracles in your life. Share this story with someone who believes in second chances. Comment below with a prayer or a story of your own miracle. Subscribe to our channel for more tales of faith, hope, and the quiet ways God still walks among us. May the Lord bless you and your loved ones, and may His light always guide you through every winter of your life.